My name is Eleanor Vance, but no one in town ever called me that. To them, I was just the Vance widow, a name whispered with a mixture of scorn and suspicion. The road out of Ash Hollow was little more than a memory now, a ribbon of dust and old boot prints stretching behind me. It twisted through dry scrub and crooked fences, all of it baked and cracked under weeks of relentless sun. The heat of the afternoon was a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders, stealing the air from my lungs. The sky was an empty, unforgiving blue with no clouds to offer a moment of shade, and the land was as still and lifeless as a forgotten grave. Nothing rustled, nothing moved. I walked with a limp, each step a fresh agony. My right heel was a raw, open wound, a testament to where the boot lining had come loose and rubbed my skin until it bled. I couldn't stop to fix it. I wouldn't. I had to get somewhere before nightfall, before the creeping darkness could swallow me whole. My hands, scraped and swollen, throbbed with a dull ache from hauling water the day before for a woman who had promised a meal but never delivered. My brown hair, usually a source of small pride, was now a matted, sweaty mess clinging to my forehead. My dress, a faded cotton thing, was a collection of tears and stains. A split in the neckline, caught on a nail that morning, gaped low, revealing more skin than I wanted to show. I had long since stopped caring if anyone saw or judged. They had already made up their minds about me. Ash Hollow wasn't a kind town. It was a place of secrets and shadows where people spoke in whispers and watched from behind dirty window panes. Since my husband Thomas had died, they treated me like a stray dog, a mangy, unwanted thing that they hoped would just disappear. I knocked on doors looking for work only to have them slammed in my face. Some whispered I was a witch, a woman with dark powers. Others claimed I had seduced Thomas Vance and then had a hand in his death. Most just assumed I was trouble and didn't care if the rest was true. The truth, however, was far simpler and infinitely more brutal. Thomas was a mean man who drank too much. He was a storm of a man, and I was the lightning rod. He'd beaten me more times than I could count, mostly when the whiskey was in him, but not always. He died last winter chasing me barefoot through the snow, screaming about money he claimed I had stolen. I hadn't. I had just run. It was a choice of him or me, and I chose me. He slipped on a patch of ice and fell down a ravine. I didn't scream. I didn't go after him. I just stood there, shivering in the biting cold until the silence told me it was over. Since then, I had been alone. No land, no family, no home. Not a single person in Ash Hollow wanted me. They gave me nothing and expected me to vanish into the wind. But I didn't. I stayed until I couldn't take another hungry night. And now I walked. My hands trembled as I reached the edge of the last fence outside of town. A rusted gate hung crooked there, held together with nothing but a frayed piece of twine. I leaned against the post to catch my breath, my chest heaving, and scanned the horizon. To the west, beyond a ridge of red rock, stood Silas Thorne's ranch. I'd heard talk of it years ago. People said he used to come into town for supplies once a month, but no one had seen him in half a year. They said he was a recluse, a ghost. His wife and young son, they said, had died in a fire and he had never recovered. That he lived like a ghost out there, just him and the cattle. Some folks were sure he'd gone mad from grief. I didn't care if he was mad. I just needed food, work, a place to sleep that wasn't a dry creek bed or the back of a broken-down wagon. I walked until my legs started to give out and my mouth was so dry I could barely swallow. I drank the last sip from my tin cup, the warm metallic taste of it a small comfort, and kept moving. By the time I reached the ranch, the sun was a low bruised orange on the horizon, and my vision swam with exhaustion. The house stood alone, a weathered cabin backed up against the red rock ridge. It wasn't much, just weathered boards, a porch that leaned a little, and a sloped roof with fresh shingles nailed over the old ones. A thin wisp of smoke curled from the chimney. A few cattle stood near the barn, their tails flicking lazily against the late-day heat. There was no sound, no movement, just a low wind and the crunch of my boots on the dirt. My stomach twisted into a tight knot of shame, not because of what I had done nothing but survive, but because of how far I had fallen. A year ago, I had a home. Even if Thomas had made it hell, it was a roof over my head. Now I stood here, a beggar, bruised and half-starved, in torn clothes, about to knock on a stranger's door. I swallowed hard and knocked twice. Nothing. I waited, my heart pounding in my ears, and knocked again. The door creaked open and he stood there. Silas Thorne was taller than I expected, with broad shoulders and arms that were sun-darkened and corded with muscle from years of hard labor. His face was rough, unshaven, with a short beard gone silver around the chin. His hair was long, a dark salt and pepper that he tucked behind his ears. His eyes were a pale, cold gray set deep beneath his brow. He looked like a man who hadn't spoken in weeks, someone who was so comfortable in silence that he had become a part of it. He didn't say anything, just looked me over slowly, not judging, but measuring what I was. I took a breath and straightened my back, even though it sent a jolt of pain through my tired muscles. "I don't want charity," I said, my voice barely a whisper, a tremor of fear running through it. "I can work." Still he didn't speak. His eyes lingered on the tear in my dress, on my scratched legs, my bleeding knuckles on the curve of my chest rising under the thin, sweat-damp fabric. But there was no leer in it, no cruel smirk, just tired eyes taking inventory. I looked down for a moment, embarrassed by my ragged appearance, but too empty to cry. I just wanted food. I just wanted somewhere to sleep that wasn't a patch of dirt. He opened the door wider and I didn't wait. I stepped inside the heat of the cabin, a shocking comfort. The inside smelled of old smoke-dry wood leather and something faintly sweet, maybe apples that had gone soft. It was a plain cabin, one table, one chair, a stove in the corner, a bedroom by the wall, a shelf with a few tools and a tin of tobacco. I saw a folded blanket on a bench and a coat hung by the door. He pointed to the back room. "Spare cots in there." His voice was low and rough, like someone who used to talk more but didn't anymore. I gave a small nod. "Thank you." He said nothing else, and turned away back to the stove where something simmered in a pot. I heard the clink of a spoon and the soft thud of his boots as he moved. I went to the back room. It was small and bare, with a lumpy mattress on a cot, a blanket folded neatly at the foot, a bucket for washing and a basin on a crate. I closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a breath I'd been holding all day. My knees buckled and I sank onto the cot. My hands shook, my back throbbed. The silence in the house wasn't comforting, but it wasn't cruel either. It was just there. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid someone would follow me or shout my name or grab me by the wrist. I wasn't warm. Not yet. I wasn't safe. Not really. But I was indoors. And nobody had told me to leave. Later, I heard him knock once. He left a bowl of beans outside my door. I opened it, sat cross-legged on the floor, and ate slowly, savoring every spoonful. When I was finished, I folded the blanket over my knees and laid back on the cot. The mattress groaned a little under my weight, but I didn't care. My eyes were heavy, but my mind stayed alert, half waiting for the dream to end, for the kindness to vanish. But it didn't. From the front room came the soft creak of floorboards, a match being struck, the scrape of metal against the stove. Silas Thorne moved around with the calm of a man who had nothing left to prove and nothing left to say. And I, bruised and judged, didn't cry that night. I just listened to the silence between our rooms and let myself rest. The morning came quiet. No rooster, no church bells, just the light shifting through the warped window panes and the smell of smoke from the stove. I blinked into the low light of the spare room, unsure for a moment where I was. Then the ache in my hips reminded me. The walk, the knock, the man at the door who hadn't asked questions. I sat up slowly, brushing hair out of my face. My dress had dried stiff with sweat. The rip under the bust showed more than I liked, and the back seam had given out another inch during the night. I reached for my shawl, only to realize I didn't have it anymore. Somewhere between town and the ridge it had slipped off and I hadn't noticed. My stomach tightened, half from nerves, half from a hunger that never really left. I folded the blanket neatly and stood brushing off the dirt from my dress that wouldn't come out. Outside the door, the house was still. I could hear the low hiss of the stove, but no other sound. I stepped into the front room. Silas was there, crouched by the stove, poking the coals with a metal rod. He wore the same work shirt from the night before, sleeves rolled to the elbow. He didn't look up when I entered, just nodded once. "There's coffee," he said, his voice dry from disuse. "Beans from last night if you want 'em." I paused. "Thank you." He stood and poured me a tin cup, then pushed it across the table without a word. I noticed his movements were slow, deliberate, not hesitant, just careful, like a man used to living without sudden noises. I sat and wrapped both hands around the warm cup. My fingers still ached from the walk, and the warmth helped. He sat across from me, took a sip of his own, and didn't speak again. Just stared out the window toward the pasture. "I can start with a trough," I said after a minute, my voice still a little shaky. "And the chickens if you have any." "No chickens," he said. I nodded. "I'll haul water then, sweep the barn. Wash the linens if you want." He looked at me then, just a glance. His eyes weren't cold, but they weren't soft either. "Ain't got no linens needin' washin'. You can check the fence line, though. North side sagged in the storm last week." "All right," I said. I stood stiff from the night's rest. "I'll get started." He pointed to the side wall where a bucket and tools were stacked. "There's gloves in the bin. Water's from the pump." I nodded and headed out. The sun was already rising sharp and high. No cloud cover. The pump stood behind the barn. I cranked the handle, hard-worked the pump until it groaned and gave way, then filled a bucket halfway before pausing. My hands stung, but it felt good doing something again. Not begging, not asking, just working. I found the fence easily. The north stretch ran along a shallow ridge with one post leaning hard and two wires slack enough for a coyote to walk through. I worked in silence, tightening what I could, pressing my full weight against the post to realign it. My palms tore open halfway through, blood mixing with splinters, but I didn't stop. When I came back, sweat soaked my chest and back. The bodice of my dress clung wet to my skin, and the tear across the neckline had opened another inch. I crossed the yard with slow steps, cradling the empty bucket, unsure if I should head straight to the barn or check in. Silas was on the porch, sitting on a wooden chair with one leg stretched out. He was whittling a block of wood, just shallow curls dropping to his boots. He watched me walk up but didn't stare. His gaze stopped at my face. "Fence?" he asked, holding his whittling up to examine it. "Two wires are weak, but I tightened what I could. Might need replacing." He gave a small nod. "You're hurt." I looked down at my hands. He stood and stepped inside without another word. I followed without thinking. He came back with a rag, a bottle of rubbing alcohol, and a tin of ointment. He motioned to the chair and I sat unsure. "Give me your hands." I hesitated. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said, his eyes on mine. I slowly lifted my palms toward him. He took one in his large, calloused hand, turned it gently to see the worst of the scrapes. I flinched when he poured the alcohol, and he paused until I nodded for him to keep going. His hands were steady. He dabbed the wounds with the ointment and wrapped my hands in a strip of linen torn from what looked like an old work shirt. Neither of us spoke for a long time. I kept my eyes on the floor. He finished, set the bottle down, and stood. "I'll take the south fence later," he said. "You did enough." I stood too more awkward now than before. I could do more. "I'm not trying to be taken in. I just need," "I know," he said. That stopped me. He looked at me again, slower this time. "You can work. You can stay. Don't owe me nothing." Something inside my chest loosened just slightly. I swallowed and gave a nod. Later, when the sun dipped westward, I stayed by the barn and stacked old feed sacks, brushing cobwebs from the rafters. My body ached, but I didn't complain. I noticed how quiet it was, how different from town. Nobody whispered. Nobody watched. Just the sound of Silas's footsteps now and then. The creak of a gate hinge. The wind rolling over dry earth. That night we ate together at the table. No talk. He passed me the bread. I passed him the beans. I didn't ask where his wife was. He didn't ask where I came from. That part could wait. But when I stood to clean up and the table creaked, he stopped me with a single word. "Sit." So I did. He cleared the dishes instead. Before I went to bed, I asked something I hadn't dared before. "Why haven't you been to town?" He paused at the door. "Ain't much left for me there." I nodded. That I understood. And as I lay in the cot again that night, sore but fed, my hands bandaged and warm, I stared at the ceiling and thought for the first time in months maybe I could stay more than just the night. Maybe he'd let me. I didn't want to hope too much. But still I did. I woke earlier on the third day. My body was sore in familiar ways, not from beatings or cold floors like before, but from labor sun in motion. I stretched slowly on the cot, my bandaged palms throbbing with every movement. The room was still dark, but a faint orange light had begun to slip in through the gaps in the shutters. The silence in the house wasn't threatening, just quiet, honest. I stood and washed quickly in the basin. The water was cold and my breath caught in my chest, but it felt good clean. I ran my fingers through my tangled hair as best I could, then pulled the sides back and tied them with a scrap of twine from the windowsill. It wasn't much, but it kept it out of my eyes. The dress I wore hung heavier than usual, damp in places from sweat that hadn't dried right. The tear along the chest had stretched lower during yesterday's chores, and the side seam under my arm had split nearly to the waist. I tried to pin it closed with a rusty brooch I found in a drawer, but it wouldn't hold. I tugged the fabric tighter, tying it with a strip of cloth. The result was crude but functional. When I stepped into the main room, Silas was already up. He stood by the stove, shirtless under his suspenders, one boot off as he rubbed his foot. His back was broad and covered in old scars, faint, long-healed things that looked like they came from work, not violence. His eyes flicked toward me once, then back to the stove. "Mornin'," he said, his voice dry from sleep. "Mornin'," I answered. He handed me a cup of coffee without asking if I wanted it. I took it without a word. It was still strange, the ease of these mornings, the lack of demands. I expected every act of kindness to come with a price, but so far he hadn't asked me for anything. Still, there were questions pressing on me. Things I hadn't dared say yet. Things I knew others might want to know too. Why Silas Thorne lived alone. What happened to his wife and child, whether I would truly be safe here, and if anyone from town would come after me. I didn't want to push, but the silence between us couldn't stretch forever. "I can mend the shirt I ruined," I said finally. "The one I wore here. I'll need a needle and some thread." "There's a box in the drawer," he said, still focused on his boot. I set my coffee down and went to it, rummaging through spools and bent pins. In the corner of the drawer, folded neat and tight, was a woman's handkerchief, embroidered, faded, and clean. I didn't touch it, just looked. "That hers?" I asked quietly. He paused at the stove, didn't turn. "Yeah." "What happened?" I asked, because it was better to ask than keep guessing. He took a long breath. "Fire, 6 years back. Stovepipe came loose in the middle of the night. By the time I smelled smoke, it was too late." "I'm sorry." He didn't answer. Just set the pan down and picked up a dishcloth. "I didn't leave town to hide," I said. "I left because I didn't have anything left. He took it all. And when he died, folks thought I pushed him." He finally looked at me. "Did you know?" I said. But I didn't help him either. He held my gaze. "Sometimes survivin' means not helpin'." The words sat between us. I nodded quietly. By midday, I was out back again, hauling water to the barn. The wind had picked up and tugged at the edges of my dress. The knot at my waist kept slipping. Dust clung to my legs and stuck to the sweat on my thighs. The sun beat down harder than it had the day before. Silas worked the field past the shed, turning earth with a hoe. He hadn't said much since breakfast, but he hadn't ignored me either. Just stayed nearby, always within sight, like he knew the distance helped me feel safer. At one point, I climbed the fence to fix a loose top rail. My dress caught on a nail and ripped another inch down the front. I cursed under my breath, then froze when I heard his voice behind me. "I got shirts in the chest," he said. "You can wear one." I turned, flushed, my arms crossed tight across my chest. "I didn't mean I started." "I ain't blind," he said, but not cruelly. "You're working hard. You need clothes that fit. That's all." I nodded, biting the inside of my cheek. "Thank you." Inside the house, I found the chest near the corner. The shirts inside were thick, soft from years of wear. I chose one and pulled it over my dress, then slipped the torn thing off underneath and folded it in my arms. The shirt hung low past my hip, sleeves rolled up to my elbows. It smelled faintly of tobacco and pine. I stood there for a long moment, holding the ruined dress, unsure whether to cry or feel relief. That night we sat by the fire. He had lit it early, the first time since I'd arrived. The warmth filled the room with a quiet comfort that made my stomach twist in unexpected ways. I curled my legs up beneath me and sipped from a tin cup of warm cider. Silas sat in his chair, boots off, one arm resting along the edge of the table. "You ever plan to go back to town?" he asked. I shook my head. "There's nothing there for me. Someone comes asking about you." "What do you want me to say, that I work here?" I said. "That's the truth, isn't it?" He nodded. "It is now." I looked down at my lap, my fingers tracing the buttons on the shirt I wore. "I'm not good at this, being looked at without wondering what they're thinking." He didn't move. "I ain't thinking anything. That's the part I don't know how to trust," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "You're not here for trust yet. Just for food and work. Trust will come if you want it." I blinked hard, letting the silence sit between us. Then I nodded once and stood, setting the cup on the table. "Good night, Silas." He watched me walk back to the spare room. He didn't speak again, but when I closed the door, I leaned against it with both palms flat, breathing deep. Something was shifting, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. But I hadn't run. Not yet, and that meant something. I woke to the sound of wind pressing against the walls. It wasn't loud, but steady, dry air moving fast over open land. I lay still on the cot for a few seconds, listening to the boards creak slightly above me, the faint clang of the barn's hanging chain tapping against metal. My eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the shutters. Morning again. I rose and pulled the shirt tighter around my waist, the one Silas had offered the day before. It was still two big sleeves rolled past the elbow, but it was clean and didn't rip when I moved. The feeling of wearing something that fit, something that didn't cling or choke, did more for my nerves than I expected. It made me feel human again. In the kitchen, Silas had already poured my coffee. He didn't say anything when I entered, just slid the tin cup across the table and went back to oiling the hinge of the front door. I took a slow sip watching him from the corner of my eye. He moved like someone used to routines, hands sure, never wasting emotion. His shirt was damp at the collar, likely from the pump outside, and his boots were already laced. I wondered how early he woke, how many years he'd started the day alone like this. He didn't look like a man uncomfortable with solitude, but something in the way he moved around me had shifted. He didn't flinch away, didn't hover. He just allowed my presence in the room like it belonged. "You wanted to check the barn again today?" I asked. He looked up after breakfast. "Got a steer with a limp. Might need to move him into the stall." I nodded. "I can help." They ate quietly. Cornmeal, coffee, nothing fancy. As we finished, Silas reached into the cupboard and pulled out a folded cloth, something he tucked away behind a jar of dried beans. He placed it on the table in front of me. "Found this. Might fit better than the shirt." I unfolded the fabric slowly. It was a woman's blouse. Simple cotton, ivory-colored, old, but clean, a little worn around the collar, but whole. The sight of it brought a lump to my throat. "Was your wife's?" I asked. He shook his head. "Sisters left it behind when she moved east. Figured it'd just sit there." I ran my thumb over the buttons, quiet for a long moment. "Thank you." I changed in the spare room, careful not to tear the seams. The blouse fit closer than the shirt, but still loose across my chest. I caught my reflection faintly in the window glass and didn't hate what I saw. My body looked stronger than it had weeks ago, more solid. My arms had bruises, but they were fading. My face was sun-darkened and thinner than it used to be, but the look in my eyes was steadier now. Outside, I followed Silas to the barn. The steer with the limp was a mottled brown and white bull calf, bigger than most and stubborn. He bucked once when Silas tried to move him. I stepped in without being asked, guiding the animal from the opposite side, speaking low and even a hand out. "You talk to him like people," Silas muttered. "They don't hit back," I said. "Makes it easier." He almost smiled. By midday, the animal was in the stall, the wound cleaned. I stood outside the barn, wiping my hands, when I heard a sound behind me. Silas's boots approaching slow and even. He stopped beside me, handed me a strip of jerky, and leaned against the post. "You weren't scared," he said after a while. "I've been around worse," I said, not looking at him. He watched me for a moment longer, then nodded toward my hands. "Cuts are healing. They still sting. They'll stop," he said, "if you stay." It wasn't a question, but it landed like one. I looked over at him. His eyes weren't guarded like before. They were calm, direct. He wasn't asking for promises, just offering me a space. "I didn't think I would," I said. "Stay. Thought I'd come here, get fed, then move on." He nodded. "But I'm tired of running," I added, my voice lower now. "Tired of explaining myself to people who don't care. You don't have to explain nothing here." I nodded slowly. In the late afternoon, a wagon appeared in the distance, coming up the path from Ash Hollow. Silas saw it first from the field and motioned me inside. "You know them?" he asked. I looked out the window just far enough to see two men in town coats, one of them driving while the other scanned the land like he expected trouble. I felt my chest tighten. "Franklin O'Malley," I said. "He used to work with Thomas. The other one I don't know." "You stay here," Silas said, calm but firm. He reached for his rifle and stepped out onto the porch. The wagon slowed near the gate. Dust rolled in behind it. O'Malley climbed down first, hands loose at his sides, but eyes sharp. "Thorne," he said. "Heard tell you took someone in." Silas didn't respond right away. "I've got no reason to lie," O'Malley went on. "That girl's got questions following her. Her husband died under strange circumstances. We were sent to bring her back to town for talking." "She's not hiding," Silas said. "She's working, that's all. She's wanted for questioning. She's not wanted for anything." There was a long pause. O'Malley glanced at the house, but Silas didn't move from the doorway. "She's here under my roof," Silas said flatly. "And if you plan on taking her without cause, you're gonna have to step through me." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. The rifle leaning casually against the doorframe was enough. O'Malley shifted his weight. "This ain't over." "It is today," Silas said. The wagon turned around, wheels creaking back down the path. Inside, I stood by the window, trembling. "They'll come back," I whispered. "I know," Silas said, closing the door behind him. "But next time you won't be alone." I stood there a long time, breathing hard, my heart racing. He reached for my hand, not forceful, just enough to anchor me, and I didn't pull away. I sat beside him at supper that night without flinching. And after the dishes were cleared, after the fire burned low and the room dimmed, I leaned my head against his shoulder and let myself be still. It wasn't a promise, but it was something real, and neither of us moved. The next few days passed without trouble, but I couldn't shake the way O'Malley had looked at the house. Not suspicious, worse. Entitled. Like he thought he had the right to decide where I belonged. I kept checking the window each morning, half expecting the wagon to roll up again. But it didn't. The wind stayed dry. The cattle moved slow, and Silas went about his work like nothing had changed. But something had. I started sleeping with my door cracked open. Not from fear, but something else. It made me feel less boxed and less apart from the man who had stood in the doorway with a rifle and said, "She's not hiding. She works here." Silas didn't speak much about it. He hadn't said my name since that night, but the way he moved around me had shifted. He walked closer past me, handed me tools without being asked, sat with me longer after dinner. Once, when I stepped onto the porch at dawn, I found him splitting kindling. He glanced up and said, without looking away, "You sleep all right." I had. I just nodded. On the 5th morning, the pump handle broke clean off in my hand. It wasn't my fault. The metal had rusted through, but still I stood there with a broken piece dangling and my jaw tight. Silas came around the side of the house a minute later, wiping grease from his hands. "You didn't break it," he said before I even explained. I held the piece out anyway. "It's useless now." He stepped close, took it from my fingers and looked at it carefully. "There's a spare pump head in the shed. We'll fix it." He looked at me. "Unless you're quittin'." "I'm not," I said. I meant it. In the shed, he knelt beside the parts bin, grunting softly as he dug through a rusted box of fittings. I stood nearby, arms crossed under my chest, watching him work. The morning was already warm and sweat curled along the back of my neck. "Can I ask you something?" I said finally. He nodded without looking up. "Why did you stand up to them? Those men?" He didn't answer right away. Just sat back on his heels, wiping his hands on a cloth. "They came to take something that wasn't theirs," he said. "You didn't even know me," I said. "I knew enough." I looked down at the dirt floor. "You said you lost your wife and your boy." He nodded once. "Did the fire take them both?" He stood slowly. I pulled him out. She was already gone. He lasted another 2 days. My throat tightened. I didn't know what to say to that. Silas looked past me toward the barn. I buried him behind a fence, just west of the rock. "Never told anyone." "I'm sorry," I whispered. He didn't reply. Just moved toward the broken pump and knelt beside it, shifting the bolts into place. I crouched down beside him. "Let me help." We worked side by side, passing tools, fitting parts, our arms brushing now and then. He smelled like cedar smoke and dirt and something clean beneath it. When the pump finally gave water again, it gushed hard enough to soak us both. I laughed loud and honest for the first time in weeks. My blouse soaked through and clinging to my chest. Silas looked at me, his chest rising, his shirt stuck to his back. He said nothing, but he didn't look away either. That night, when I stepped in the house, I found a bar of lye soap and a fresh cloth towel folded on the bench outside the bath basin. There was no note, just a gesture. I cleaned myself slowly, scrubbing every inch of my skin until it burned. Then I wrapped the towel tight and stood in front of the mirror. My body had changed, stronger arms, sun on my shoulders, weight returning to my hips. The bruises had mostly faded, but I still saw that girl who had knocked on his door barefoot and desperate. Only now she wasn't alone. Later, I stepped into the main room to find him sitting near the fire. His shirt was open at the throat, suspenders, slack sleeves rolled to his elbows. He was drinking from a tin cup, something darker than cider. I hesitated near the doorway. "Silas," he looked up. "Can I sit?" He nodded once. I came closer, the towel still wrapped around my shoulders. The blouse I wore under it was slightly unbuttoned from the bath damp in places. When I sat beside him, the towel slipped just enough to show my collarbone and a hint of the soft curve below it. I didn't adjust it. He stared into the fire. "You don't owe me anything." "I know." We sat in silence, the heat from the fire warming our knees. I turned toward him, speaking softly. "When you fixed that pump with me today, I didn't feel like a burden. You're not." I felt like one for a long time. His voice was low. "Not here." I reached for his hand, slowly, unsure. He didn't move at first, but then his fingers curled around mine, solid and warm and without demand. I looked down at our hands, then back at him. "You never asked what happened the night Thomas died. You'll tell me if you want to." "I do," I said. "But not tonight." He nodded once, and when I leaned my head against his shoulder again, this time he tilted his head lightly against mine. It wasn't a kiss. Not yet. But it was closer than anything we'd shared. When I finally stood to leave, I paused at the edge of the doorway. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. His eyes met mine. Good. And for the first time since I'd arrived, the silence between us didn't feel heavy. It felt like something new had taken root, something steady, something worth staying for. The following morning, the light came through gray and early. Rain had fallen in the night. Not much, just enough to settle the dust and leave the porch damp. I stood barefoot on the wood planks. Silas's old shirt tied at my waist, my blouse and skirt still drying near the stove inside. My hair hung loose over my shoulders, still damp from the night before. The air was cooler than usual. I could smell wet dirt and fresh grass. I heard his boots behind me before I saw him. He stopped just inside the doorway, arms crossed, his voice low. "You're up early." I didn't turn. Couldn't sleep. Bad dreams. I nodded once. Not bad exactly, just the kind that makes you remember. He stepped outside slowly and stood beside me, looking out at the open stretch of field. The cattle were still down near the ravine, their shapes soft in the morning haze. "Rained enough to fill the lower troughs," he said. "I'll check him after breakfast." I glanced at him. "I'll come with you." His gaze lingered on my face a moment too long before he looked back out. "All right." Inside, while he poured coffee, I folded the now dry blouse neatly and placed it back in the small trunk in the spare room. I didn't want to wear it today. The shirt I had on smelled faintly of him, of firewood and sweat and earth. It felt closer to where I was now. As we ate, I caught him glancing at me more than usual. Not in a way that made me flinch, but one that made my heart beat harder. I felt seen, not in the way men in Ash Hollow used to look at me, not as something to use or whisper about. Silas's eyes held weight, restraint, something careful that hadn't taken shape yet. After breakfast, we walked together along the fence line. The mud squelched under our boots. The cattle had already moved uphill, and the lower pasture lay empty except for some crows picking at old grass. I paused by the trough and looked at the reflection in the water, my own face drawn but firm and his beside mine, quiet and steady. "Do you want me here?" I asked. Suddenly, my voice low but clear. He didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Not just for work number." I turned toward him. "Then why haven't you touched me?" He looked at me for a long moment, his mouth set firm, his brow furrowed like he was weighing something. "Because I don't want you thinking you owe me," he said, "and because I've buried too much already to take something I'm not sure is real." My throat tightened, but I didn't look away. What if I'm sure? He stepped closer, slow, like giving me time to change my mind. His hand lifted, hovered near my face, then settled lightly on my jaw. His thumb brushed the side of my cheek, tracing a faint line beneath my eye. I leaned into the touch. Our eyes met, and then finally he kissed me. It wasn't fast. It wasn't rough. His lips met mine with a kind of restraint that made my knees go weak. I kissed him back slowly, my hands coming to rest at his chest. The cold wind moved around us, but neither pulled away. When we parted, he kept his forehead close to mine. "I'm not a man with many words," he murmured. "You don't need 'em," I whispered. We walked back in silence, our shoulders brushing now and then, his fingers brushing mine once, but not grabbing. The air between us had changed. Back at the house, I set to work on the wash while he hauled feed. My body moved with more ease than it had since I arrived. It wasn't just that I felt safe now. It was that I felt chosen, not taken in, not tolerated, but wanted. That evening, I found an old pair of trousers in a cedar chest and cut them down to fit. I wore them with a shirt tied again at the waist and noticed how much stronger I looked now. Not soft, not fragile, not ruined. My arms were firm, my hips fuller. My bruises had faded completely. At supper, I brought up what neither of us had said out loud yet. "If they come back from town," I said, "they'll bring someone with authority next time. Maybe the sheriff." He nodded. I figured. "They'll say I'm hiding, that I ran. I'll say you didn't." I set my fork down. "I want to stay here. Not just as a worker, not as a guest. I want a life. If that means facing questions, I'll do it. But I won't run anymore." He leaned back in the chair, his eyes heavy but warm. "I got a room here that's been empty for 6 years," he said. "I kept it shut because I didn't know what to do with it." My heart started to race. "You could open it," I said. "You have to share it." I smiled slowly. "I want to." That night, I moved my things from the spare room into his. There weren't many, just a folded blouse, the shoes. I rarely wore a comb, the worn dress I'd arrived in, and the knife I kept under the cot. I didn't need the knife anymore. I left it on the shelf. When I stepped into his room, he had already lit the lamp and turned down the bed. He sat on the edge, still in his work shirt, watching me cross the threshold. We didn't speak. I came to him slowly, placed my hand over his chest where his heartbeat thumped steady beneath the fabric. He reached for my waist, pulled me into his lap. When he kissed me this time, it was different, deeper. Our hands roamed, hesitant at first, then more certain. My fingers slid over his collarbone. His hands moved along my back under the shirt. Clothes were pushed aside, but not ripped. Skin touched skin. There was no hurry, no shame, just two people learning what it meant to be close again without fear. Later, I curled against him beneath the quilt, my head on his shoulder. His hand rested at the curve of my hip. My chest rose and fell slow, steady. Neither of us spoke of love. Not yet. But the silence between us said enough, and this time I didn't crack the door when I fell asleep. I left it wide open. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. Not dull, but calm in a way that felt new. The kind of quiet where two people lived close, moved around each other with ease, and didn't need to fill every silence with words. I worked like I always had, hauling water, scrubbing tools, helping with the fencing. But now when the chores were done, I stayed near Silas without thinking. We shared meals, touched shoulders by the stove-brushed hands while carrying feed, and slept in the same bed with no questions asked. But the peace didn't mean everything was settled. Not completely. One morning while pulling clean linens from the clothesline, I paused and glanced toward the ridge. My chest tightened. The air was still. Nothing moved out there. But my gut said it wasn't over. Men like O'Malley didn't forget when someone challenged their control. And sheriffs, if one came, wouldn't be as easily turned away as Franklin had been. Later that evening after supper, I stood barefoot at the doorway of the house, watching the sky fade into dark. Silas came up behind me and set his hand gently on my back. His touch was light but steady. "You've been quiet today," he said. "They'll come back," I replied without turning. "Franklin's someone like him. They don't like women like me getting a second chance." "You didn't ask for a second chance," he said. "You worked for it. That doesn't matter to men like him." He stepped beside me, folding his arms. "Then we'll deal with it when they do." I looked up at him. "You say that so easy." "It's not easy. I just don't see the use in borrowing fear." I took a breath. "There's things I haven't told you about that night." His eyes didn't waver. "Tell me." "I didn't just run. I fought back," I said slowly. "Thomas tried to drag me out by my hair. I hit him with a lantern. It didn't break, but it stunned him. That's when he chased me out the door down the hill. He was drunk and furious. I thought he'd catch me. Thought he'd kill me." Silas didn't speak. He waited. He slipped. I went on, my voice low. "I didn't push him, but I saw him fall. I heard the crack when he hit the rocks. I didn't climb down. I just stood there and waited for the noise to stop." Silas looked out across the field. "You didn't run back to town for help." "I did the next day," I said. "But they already hated me. They said I let him die." He nodded slowly. "You did what you had to." I studied him, searching his face. "Do you believe me?" He turned his gaze to her. "I believe you wouldn't be standing here now if you hadn't done exactly what you did. That's enough." The words settled something inside me. That night, as we lay side by side, I turned into him, tucked my leg over his, and his hand found my waist. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. In the middle of the night, a noise outside pulled Silas from bed. He dressed quickly. Shirt half-buttoned, boots tugged on. I sat up, pulling the quilt to my chest. "What is it?" I whispered. "Horse." "Just one, maybe two," he said, already moving toward the rifle by the door. I followed him into the front room, my heart pounding. He peered through the slats in the shutters. A lone rider was approaching. No wagon, no lantern, just a tall man in a dark coat riding slow toward the front gate. Another man followed behind on foot, leading a mule. Silas stepped onto the porch, rifle at his side. I stood in the doorway, my arms folded across my chest. The rider stopped just outside the fence. The man leading the mule raised his hand in greeting. "Evening. Sorry to bother so late," he called out. "We're looking for Eleanor Vance." Silas didn't move. "Who's asking?" The man stepped forward. He wasn't armed. Or if he was, he kept it hidden. "Sheriff Brody," he said. "Ash Hollow sent word. Says there's some questions need answerin'. We're here to bring her in for testimony. That's all. No charges filed." I stepped forward. "If I testify, does that mean it's done?" "Depends what you say," the sheriff replied. "But no one's looking to hang you. Not unless you give me a reason." Silas turned back to me. "It's your call." I stared at the man at the gate, then nodded. "I'll go, but not tonight." Sheriff Brody studied me for a long second, then nodded once. "We'll be at the edge of town. You've got 3 days. He tipped his hat and led the mule back toward the trees. Silas closed the door gently behind him. "You don't have to go," he said. "Yes, I do," I said. "I don't want to keep looking over my shoulder. I want this." I looked around the cabin, then at him. "To be real, I want to be clean. You'll go alone." I shook my head. "You'll come with me." His mouth curved faintly. "You sure I don't want to face it without you?" He took my hand in his. "Then we'll go together." For the first time since that cold night months ago, I didn't feel chased. I felt steady. I felt ready. Not just to defend myself, but to claim the life I was building with him. And in that moment, I knew Ash Hollow could whisper whatever it wanted. I wasn't going back to be judged. I was going back to end it. We rode out 2 days later, just after dawn. Silas had hitched the buckboard the night before, packed provisions without much talk. I folded my few belongings into a flour sack, 2 clean shirts, a shawl, my comb, and tucked the rest beneath the cot. I wasn't running. I was coming back. And this time I wouldn't be returning alone. The trail into Ash Hollow was quiet. A dry wind swept through mesquite and sagebrush. Dust kicked up behind the wheels and clung to the folds of my shirt. I sat beside Silas, my hands folded in my lap, my eyes forward. He didn't speak unless it was to point something out. Fresh tracks near the ridge, a broken fence post that someone ought to fix. He was not nervous, just steady. But my heart thudded. It had been months since I last saw the town. The buildings would still be the same. The church steeple with chipped paint. The general store with warped steps. The saloon that started gossip quicker than it served whiskey. The people would be the same too, or worse. And Franklin O'Malley would no doubt be waiting with that smirk of his, ready to see me dragged through some farce of an inquiry. But I wasn't the same woman who'd stumbled out into the desert in torn shoes, desperate for shelter. I'd worked every day since then. I'd bled and healed. I'd earned peace. As we neared the edge of town, Silas pulled the reins and slowed the wagon. "You want to walk in from here?" I hesitated, then nodded. "I do." We stepped down, our boots hitting the dirt. The sun was high now, burning off the chill. I adjusted my shirt at the waist, ran a hand over my tied-back hair, and took a breath. Sheriff Brody stood waiting near the well by the town square. Beside him was Franklin, his arms crossed, his boots planted like he owned the dust under his feet. "Mornin'," the sheriff said plainly. I nodded. "I came like I said I would." "We appreciate it," he said. "Meetin's in the back room of the courthouse. Judge Harrison's there. It won't take long." I looked at Silas. "You wait here. I'll be close," he said, his voice calm. As I stepped into the courthouse, Franklin followed behind with slow steps. I felt him leering but didn't turn. Inside, Judge Harrison sat behind a heavy desk, spectacles perched low on his nose, a thin ledger open before him. "Miss Vance," he said without looking up. "Or should I say Widow Vance?" "Just Eleanor," I said. "Sit down, Eleanor." I did. What happened the night Thomas Vance died? My hands curled into fists in my lap. My voice didn't shake. He was drunk. He accused me of stealing again. I told him I didn't take a thing. He flew into a rage. I ran. He chased me out into the snow down the ridge. He slipped. I saw him fall. I didn't push him. Judge Harrison looked up. "And why didn't you report it that night?" "I was barefoot and bleeding," I said. I waited till daylight. Walked back into town with frostbite on both feet. No one listened then. "And now, I want to be heard," I said. "Not just because I want it behind me, but because I have someone now alive. And I won't let this hang over it anymore." The room was quiet for a long moment. Franklin scoffed from a corner. "She's clever with words. Always was. Seduced half the men in town, and now she's got herself a new one." Judge Harrison narrowed his eyes. "That's enough." Franklin stepped forward. "Ask her what she did to Thomas's money. It disappeared after he died." "I didn't touch it," I said sharply. "He drank it, gambled it away before the ground froze." Judge Harrison held up a hand. "I reviewed the records. Thomas had debts. Outstanding ones. That's true." He looked at me closely. "Do you want to press charges against anyone, Miss Vance?" I shook my head. "I just want to be left alone." The judge closed the ledger. "Then you're free to go." Franklin stiffened. "You can't just let her." "I just did." I stood. My knees felt weak, but I didn't show it. Outside, the sun burned hotter. Silas was still there, standing near the wagon, his arms folded, watching every face on the street. I walked to him with slow steps, my heart hammering. "Well," he asked. "I'm free," I said. He didn't say anything else, just nodded once and helped me up into the seat. As we rode out of town, the stares followed us. Some curious, some hateful, but none of it touched me. Halfway back to the ranch, I finally exhaled. "It's over," I said, my voice soft. "It is," Silas replied. I turned to him. "Why did you wait for me all those hours?" "Because you asked me to." I studied him a moment longer. "And if I asked you to marry me?" He glanced sideways at me. "I'd say you ought to let a man ask first." I smiled. "Then what are you waiting for?" He pulled the wagon to a stop right there on the trail, turned fully toward me and said, "Marry me, Eleanor." I didn't blink. Yes. We didn't kiss then. Not yet. We just sat on that bench seat, dust on our boots, heat in the air, and a lifetime ahead of us. In this time, I didn't feel like someone who survived. I felt like someone who belonged. We returned to the ranch just before sunset. The sky stretched wide and orange across the hills, clouds moving slow and low, the kind of sky that told of cooler days ahead. Silas guided the wagon down the slope while I sat beside him, the wind catching loose strands of my hair. Neither of us spoke, but the quiet wasn't heavy like before. It was full settled. Something had changed. No more waiting. No more hiding. No more looking over our shoulders. He stopped the wagon near the porch, climbed down, and held out a hand. I didn't hesitate. My fingers slipped into his firm and warm. I stepped down, my boots crunching on the gravel path. I looked at the house, at the worn steps, the faded shutters, the line of fence I'd repaired weeks ago, and it didn't feel borrowed anymore. It felt mine. "I'll unhitch the team," Silas said. "I'll get supper started." He paused. "We'll do it together." We moved through the evening like we had done for weeks now, but with a new rhythm. I set the pot to boil while he chopped kindling. I stirred beans and cornbread while he hauled a water bucket in from the pump. When we finally sat down to eat, the sun had vanished behind the ridge, and the fire inside crackled steady. Silas reached for my hand before we even started the meal. Just a simple gesture, rough fingers closing over mine. "We could head to the preacher in a few days," he said. "Make it proper." I smiled softly. "Or we could wait a bit. I'd rather marry you here." He nodded. "Then we'll do it here." I tilted my head. "You ever think you'd start over?" I waited for more, but that was it. He didn't need to explain. His life had ended once already when the fire took his wife and boy. He hadn't expected to get another. After we ate, I pulled my chair beside his by the hearth. He leaned back, his legs stretched out, one arm draped along the table. I sat close, my bare foot brushing his calf. My body was relaxed now in ways it hadn't been for years. I didn't flinch at shadows. I didn't hold my breath in doorways. "Do you think they'll talk?" I asked after a while. "Ash Hollow," he shrugged. "Always have, always will." "You mind it?" He looked at me. "No one here but us." I leaned over and kissed him, soft and sure. His hand rose to my cheek, his thumb brushing just beneath my eye. "You'll take my name?" he asked. I smiled against his lips. "I already have." We went to bed early, not out of weariness, but to be close. I undressed slowly, not from shame, but from comfort, folding my shirt and trousers on the stool near the bed. Silas watched from where he sat at the edge of the mattress, his eyes steady. When I stepped between his knees and ran my fingers through his hair, he closed his eyes and pulled me into his lap. Our kisses grew deeper. His hands slid over my back, mine pressing against the hard muscle of his chest. We made love slowly under the soft creak of the rafters and the warmth of the quilt. Afterward, I lay curled into his side, my cheek against his shoulder. His hand rested at my hip, his fingers trailing lazily across my skin. "You want a child?" I asked quietly, the question floating between us. He looked down at me. "If you do." I nodded. "Someday when it's right, we'll make a place for one," he said. My eyes fluttered closed. "We already have." The next morning I rose before him, stepped outside into the cool air barefoot, the sun just breaking over the ridge. I filled the basin, scrubbed my face, then walked out to the fence line, the same stretch I'd repaired my first day there. Silas joined me a while later, coffee in one hand, his other sliding around my waist as he stood beside me. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. He didn't answer. He just pulled me closer and kissed my forehead. And with that, the past stayed behind us. No debts, no fear, no rumors that mattered. Just the land, the work, the quiet, and the kind of love that came not with words but with staying. Enjoying these epic Wild West stories? Hit subscribe for more gripping tales of bravery, conflict, and unexpected heroes. Now tap the video on screen to experience a story with a twist you'll never forget.